Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I am doing my picks for the third weekend of the summer stage for the 2023 Overwatch League season. Some interesting games this weekend, so let's go. Let's jump in and let's start talking about them. We open up this weekend with my first big pick game of the weekend. Bit of a shocker here. Usually we don't have big picks right away, but my first big pick game is the Seoul Infernal taking on the Dallas Fuel. Currently, they're the top two teams in the standings in the Eastern region, both sitting at 4-0 plus 11. Though their schedules have been very, very different. The Dallas Fuel have had a pretty easy schedule. They've played a lot of contenders teams. They played Shanghai as well, so most of their matches have not been against contenders teams. While you look at the Seoul Infernal, they already played the Hangzhou Spark, for example. So there's a little bit of a disparity here, so it's a little bit difficult to kind of tell where these teams are. But I do think that if you look at these two teams, they're the top teams in the Eastern region right now. It'll be interesting to see what happens when they play. There was news that came out over the past few days that Mag currently has COVID, so whether or not he's playing at full strength, we don't really know. I think you can play relatively fine. I don't think it's really that big of a deal. I do think there are some issues in terms of like communication, and sometimes like there's a breakdown in terms of just what you're able to do, and sometimes your players are very split up and separated as a result of COVID, so not playing together, which kind of hurts your team a bit. But I think the Infernal shouldn't hurt them too much, but maybe a little bit of an edge there for the Dallas Fuel in that way. But I think this is going to be a good matchup. I think these are the two best teams in the region right now. Obviously the records would show that, but I also think Dallas have improved quite a lot. I think they looked a lot better going into the end of the spring stage as well, so I think they're just kind of getting better and better. I think Bliss and MCD are starting to work together better. I think the team as a whole are kind of trying to figure, or starting to really kind of get at the root of kind of what works for them better, as opposed to trying to kind of figure it out as they went. I think that now they look a little bit better as a team. I haven't gotten to watch as much of the Dallas Fuel as I would like in this second half of the year, unfortunately, so I am still a little bit unsure what to expect from either of these teams in terms of the full extent of what we've seen from them. But I do think this game should be one of the better ones here in this APAC region. But I do think right now you have to favor the Seoul Infernal. They've been better. They've been more consistent. Last time these two teams played, it was not a particularly close series when they played in the Mid-Season Madness or the Spring Stage knockouts. Seoul Infernal won that one pretty convincingly. So I hope it's a decent match, but I'm going to say it is a 3-1 win for the Seoul Infernal. Like I said, they're the top two teams in the region right now, so it has the makings to be something good. I'll be interested to see what happens with the kind of factors surrounding the game, with the COVID situation with Mag and some of the other things going on in the region. You know, what does Dallas look like now? It's been a little bit since they played, so I'll be interested to see what happens, but I do think the Seoul Infernal are the favorites to win this game. I think they will take this one here. Up next, we have the Dreamers taking on Seoul Dynasty. Interesting matchup here, of course. Rough weekend this past weekend for the Dynasty, who won big against the Hangzhou Spark and then just completely embarrassed themselves in a matchup against O2 Blast, who they should have been easily able to beat. O2 Blast roster, really is not that good. They're the bottom ranked team in this region right now, so they should not have lost that game, but they did. But overall, since they added Vindame to this team, I think they've looked better. Obviously, they've only played 2 games with Vindame, but I think he does help out quite a bit. I think Easyhan is a much better part of this team than Prophet, though he did look very good against this Dynasty team when they played on stage. So it's an interesting Dynasty team. Dreamers are pretty good. I think they're on the higher end of the contenders teams. Last weekend was not a good weekend for them. They struggled, losing a lot of their matchups. I think they went 0-2 last weekend. So rough go from Dreamers. Puts it in an interesting position here. You kind of had two teams that looked in kind of weird spots in the first weekend and now are in even more weird spots after the second weekend. So I think this one could be pretty close, considering the fact that Dynasty struggled against O2 Blast. I don't think it's going to be a very, dominant game on either side. I think Dynasty should be able to at least compete with Dreamers if they do lose the game. Whereas Dreamers, I think, are the better contenders team compared to O2 Blast. So I do think it will be an interesting challenge to see how these teams match up. But I think that Dynasty should be favored to win this game. I can't speak. I think they will take this one. I do think it's going to be a relatively close game, though. I'm going to say a score of 3-2. I don't know what to expect from these teams anymore. This region is wild. It is hard to predict sometimes, but I do think the Dynasty are going to walk away from this one ultimately victorious, so it'll be a relatively close series. Up next, we have the Hangzhou Spark taking on Poker Face. Another interesting matchup here. Two teams kind of in interesting spots as well. This whole region is very interesting. Poker Face got their first win last week, I believe, over Dreamers. Spark had an interesting week last week, losing to the Dynasty, which was kind of a surprise. And they, of course, lost to the Infernal, but they have a win against the Charge under their belt. And I believe their win from last week was against the Panthera roster, which is not a great roster. So they're another team that's in an interesting spot because they haven't really beaten a great team. The Charge have looked kind of bad. Panthera doesn't look all that great. And they lost to the Dynasty, who are and they lost to Infernal, who are very good. So another match that could be decently close, especially because I think Poker Face is one of the better contenders rosters on paper. They did, of course, just lose Finale, who left Poker Face to go to the Vegas Eternal. So that could benefit the Spark, where now there's a little bit more less firepower on Poker Face. That leaves Valentine and Victoria as the only two damage players on Poker Face, and I am not a huge fan of that support duo, or that damage duo. I don't think they were particularly good on Boston. I think this is a worse team than that Boston roster was, so I think Spark should be able to take this one. I think they'll win this one. I'm going to say by a score of 3-0, because I just don't buy the Poker Face roster that much, and I think that the Spark should be able to win, especially with Poker Face losing a player who is pretty good. Yeah, I think Spark should take this one in a decently dominant fashion. Up next, we have the LA Gladiators taking on the London Spitfire. Another interesting matchup here. Of course, Spitfire come in favor. Good week last week. They went 2-0 with wins over the San Francisco Shock and the LA Valiant. Gladiators, their last weekend was not this past weekend, but the weekend before, when they went 0-2, losing to the Shock and the Valiant. So if you base it on that kind of thing, you'd think the London should be favored because they beat the opponent that the Gladiators lost to. But because the Gladiators didn't play last weekend, I think there's a much bigger room for improvement for the Gladiators. When you see teams have rough weeks and then have a week off, generally speaking, if they're a good team on paper, they usually come back looking stronger. I think the Gladiators, with the addition of Cal, I think they help this team out quite a bit. I think this team will look better if they can find a way to work Cal into the roster, because they're a very talented player who is very, very, very good in that flex support role. The rumors are that Lastro is going to be the one who they released. I don't know for sure if that's going to happen. They have 4 supports right now. Seems likely that one of the supports goes. I don't think it's going to be Funny Astro because he's the only main support they have. Babel gets a lot of playtime, so seemingly Cal was brought in so that they can replace Lastro, but we'll see what happens with that. But I do like this Gladiators roster. I think that when they can work Marvel in fully, this roster should be able to be more successful. London does prove an interesting challenge because they play a very specific style, and they're a bit more of a challenge to beat. But I think the Gladiators should be able to win this one, and so I am going to give them the win here. But I'm going to say it is a 3-1. I think the Spitfire are a respectable team, and they have enough firepower to win a game, or win a map here, and push them to the ropes a bit, but I do think Gladiators will ultimately walk away with the win. Up next is the Boston Uprising taking on the LA Valiant. Valiant, of course, after the win over the Gladiators, kind of living high and large, or big and large, whatever you want to say. Last weekend, not great for them, losing to the Spitfire. Kind of a sticking point, losing to the Shock, though, in a very close series there. I think the Valiant are improving a lot, and they should be expected to be decent, but I think Boston's way too good for this Valiant roster. Boston's competing with the likes of Florida and Houston and Atlanta at the top. Valiant are struggling to get past teams like London I don't think you can really expect the Uprising to lose this one. So I think it's going to be a dominant 3-0 win for them. I really don't see the Valiant doing much to this Uprising roster, who I think are just too good right now. I think they're way too strong. I would love to see the Uprising make a Flex DPS edition. I don't think they will. It's too late in the season. It's going to be hard to get a visa for anybody to come over, though maybe there's a chance they can make a move with someone who has one. But I do think the Boston Uprising take this one in a relatively dominant fashion. Up next is my second big pick game of the weekend. Already here, we have the Atlanta Reign taking on the Florida Mayhem. This is a very interesting weekend for the Atlanta Reign. After losing their first game of the season last week against the Houston Outlaws, things are a little bit more open, and they're playing now the number 2 ranked team in the league. After this weekend, 3 of their last 4 games will have been against the 2, 3, and 4 seeded teams. Regardless of kind of how things spin, those are still going to be your 2nd, 3rd, and 4th seeded teams. Maybe even the 1st seed, depending on what happens overall. But this is a very big match for the Atlanta Reign because they need to try to continue to solidify and hold their spot here at the top of the Western region standings. Florida is 1 game behind Atlanta. Differential is more in favor of Atlanta right now. They have 9 points ahead of Florida. But if Florida can win this game, big upset type of fashion, you have to think that maybe Atlanta is a little more mortal. I think that they got exposed a bit against Houston. I think Houston played a much better rush style than what Atlanta did. Florida can play everything. And I think that is the biggest problem if I look at the Reign versus the Mayhem. You look at the Uprising game against the Mayhem last weekend, I think there are similar things going on here, right? Reign are much better on dive and those Sombra Tracer comps than they are in any other composition. It's not to say they're not very good in other comps. That is their best look. And if they can play that Sombra Tracer dive, chances are they're going to win those maps against Florida. But if there are rush-heavy maps, if there are maps that push the comps away from Sombra Tracer, those can start to steamroll into Florida's favor. You look at last week, Atlanta lost that Circuit Royale to Toronto. Granted, it was a 7-6, 3 rounds, either side type of match where in that way you look at the game and you say, okay, so it's very clear that it's not simple in that way, that was a very close match. There was a close map, even if Atlanta lost it. It went the distance. There is a blueprint now for how to beat Atlanta, and it's if you can force them off of some of their comfort comps, you can punish Donghack, you can really find a way to expose this Reign team, but you have to play very, very high level. You have to play pretty much perfectly. So it's going to be tough for Florida to win here, because as good as Florida is, I think they are definitively right now the 2nd best team in the Overwatch League. I know Houston beat Atlanta, but it took 4 times for Houston to beat Atlanta. We haven't seen Florida and Atlanta play yet. So we really don't know who is the better team between these two. We can make assumptions. We can make guesses. This will be their first matchup for the season. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I think it's going to be a banger of a series. I think it's going to go the distance. It's going to be a 5-mapper. But I will give the edge 3-2 to the Atlanta Reign because I think they're the better team right now. They still look to be the best team in the world. They've still only lost a single game this season across the entire thing, It's a very, very... It's tough to look at this matchup and think that it's going to be an easy fight either way. But I do feel better about Atlanta right now. I think it could go either way, but I think Atlanta has a little bit more of that clutch potential in them that I think they'll pull it away and ultimately be victorious in this one. Moving back over to the APAC region now for Saturday's matches. We have O2 Blast taking on Dreamers. Like I said before with Dreamers, I think they're one of the better teams in this contenders region, so I think they should be favored to win this game. Yes, O2 Blast beat Seoul Dynasty, and that was a shocking type of result, and I have Dynasty beating Dreamers. So if you want to go with the transitive property, the circle of suck property, that if Dynasty beat Dreamers in my predictions, and O2 Blast beat Dynasty, then by that logic, O2 Blast should beat Dreamers. But that's not necessarily true. There's matchups and things like that. That O2 Blast Dynasty game was on LAN. There's always kind of factors that go into it. I think Dreamers is a better team. I think they should win this one. I'm going to say a score of 3-1. I don't know exactly what to expect here. APAC has been very hard for me to follow this summer stage just because of my schedule. So I try to follow it, but I don't know who's been looking the best. So just based on what I have seen, what I do know, Dreamers to me should still be favored. So I'm going to take them to win this one by a score of 3-1. Next game we have is the Dallas Fuel Guangzhou Charge matchup. An interesting one in the first half of the season, though not nearly as interesting anymore. Lots of changes made to this Guangzhou Charge roster. Obviously, their coaching staff is gone. Basically, their entire roster is changed now that they have gone pretty much to a full Chinese roster. They went to a full Chinese roster. Choi Se-won, Piggy, gone. Gaga, Jinmu are in. I don't really feel great about this Charge roster right now. Limited practice time. They didn't look great last week. They lost some games last week, and now they don't have their best player in Choi Se-won. I think that it's very tough for Charge to have a really good matchup here, especially because I don't think they're going to based on their duo now, I think it's going to be tough for the full team to find the same value. I think when you put Jinmu in, I think that forces Jimmy off of some of the things that he would rather play. He's not going to really be able to play the Hangzhou in this matchup because he's going to have to be the Tracer player. So I don't love it. I don't love where Charge is right now. So to me, you got to go the Dallas Fuel in this one. I'm going to say a score of 3-0. I don't buy Charge anymore. I think after the changes they made to their roster, they just don't look nearly as good. And I think that they're going to struggle here in this one. Up next, we have Seoul Infernal versus Panthera. This one to me is pretty easy. I think you look at this matchup, Infernal are really, really good. Panthera are not great. Yes, they beat Guangzhou Charge, but I don't think the Charge are very, very good. And I think that the Infernal should be able to win this one with relative ease. They're the much better team. They are the best team in the league. And I think when you look at this team where it is and the results that you've seen from them, I think you have to pick the Infernal in this one in a pretty dominant 3-0 fashion. No shade to Panthera. I think they're a good team when they can kind of play some ways, you know. Obviously, they beat the Guangzhou Charge. That's a pretty good accomplishment, but the Infernal are so much better. I don't think they really have any chance of taking them down there. Final APAC match on Saturday is the Hangzhou Spark taking on the Shanghai Dragons. An interesting one, to say the least. I like what Shanghai has done with these changes. I think the second half of the season, it has not been the best for them, though it has been better than their first half of the season, definitively. They've won 2 games already, so clearly they're having a better go in the second half than they did in the first half. Yes, they have some losses. They beat Poker Face, which is a good win for them. You like to see that happen. They beat the Seoul Dynasty, so they've beaten some okay competition. Losing to Dreamers, not great. Losing to Dallas Fuel, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think it's going to be an interesting one to watch, but I think the Spark right now are the better team. Yes, I don't think the Spark have done a lot of things to inspire a ton of confidence in me. I think they've struggled a bit this season, and they've lost some games they probably shouldn't have lost. But at the end of the day, I do think that the Dragons are just not quite where the Spark are at their peaks, and I think that the things, realistically, the Dragons are good at, I mean, they can play ball comps in a way that the Spark really can't. But I still don't love the Shanghai support duo. I think it's not a solid one, all things considered. I think Spark are better, even if that is their weakest part of their roster. I still think it's a better one. So I'm going to say it is a Hangzhou Spark victory here by a score of 3-1. Shanghai can definitely take a map. I don't think that's, out of the picture. But I just think right now, Spark look like the stronger of the two teams. Up next is the Vancouver Titans taking on the Washington Justice. Have not seen these two teams either in a while. They both had the week off last weekend. Rough outings for both of these teams to kick off the summer stage. Vancouver, with their roster change, they have gotten a bit lucky considering the meta is Echo heavy. You can still play Tracer Sombra, which works pretty well with Sugar Free and Heesang, and if you need to play Echo, you can do that as well. Echo Tracer is something that Heesang and Sugar Free can play as well. But I still think that they've lost some of that dynamic firepower with the kind of DPS change. Obviously, only so much you can do about it. It was a necessary move. They had to make it. But I certainly think that they are going to have a very specific style of play. And with maps entering the map pool like Circuit Royale, I think it's going to be very difficult for this team to have a ton of success as we kind of go into the future. Washington, I think that they had a bit of a rough week, but considering I think they did improve with the addition of Donghoon in the support line, I think they should be a better roster, all things considered, by the end of the day. So I will say that this one goes in the favor of the Washington Justice. Maybe a little bit of a controversial pick, because I think the Titans did look good in the first half of the season, but I think their changes just hurt this roster more than anything else. So I'm going to say 3-0 for the Justice. I know it's a bit of a hot take potentially, but I really like what the Justice have with their DPS duo. I think they have much more firepower potential. Titans, I want to see. Yes, Heesang is with the team now, which I think will help, and I think we'll see the team get better. But I'm going to say Justice take this one. I just think that they right now look better, and I'm going to give them the edge here. Next match is another banger of a series. Boston Uprising taking on the Atlanta Reign. Now, I do think Atlanta's going to win. I'll just say it straight up at the beginning. I think Atlanta's going to win. I think Boston is the team that has challenged Atlanta the best, that didn't beat them. Obviously, Houston has since beaten them. That match in the upper bracket finals in the summer or Midseason Madness was the greatest challenge they have faced, where the Reign still walked away from it victorious. But then, of course, they lost to them last weekend. But when the Uprising and the Reign played last stage, it was a very good match, and it was a very, very, very close one, even if the score was a 3-1. Boston, their first map, very, very good against Atlanta. I think Boston has improved a lot in the second half of the season with the addition of Moby Dick as their head coach. I think the swap to running Twilight pretty much full-time, if not entirely full-time, was the right move. I think he's had a very good year, and I think having him, even if Izayaki is still a very good player, I think Twilight has just been the better player so far, and I think that he enables the team to win in ways that Izayaki doesn't necessarily do. Not that Izayaki's bad, I think he has a very good role in this team. I think double flex is very, very good for them. But it's going to be tough, I think, to see the Uprising have the same success without Twilight on this roster. But the problem with both of these teams is that kind of flexibility of compositions, where I think Atlanta, like I said, looks much better when they can run those dive comps. But they also are better on rush, significantly better on rush than the Boston Uprising are, because Boston just do not have a flex DPS player. I've said it a million times, and I will keep saying it. If Boston were to sign Choi Zaewon, I think this Uprising roster would be immediately better. They'd immediately be a much better team, because when they need those flex DPS comps, when they need someone to come in and be able to play Mei or play Genji, they would have that. And I think that is what this team is lacking. And I think without that, Reign with Stalker can just kind of figure out ways to win that are just not really open to Boston. I like Boston. I think they're one of the most fun teams to watch. I enjoy them, watching them more than probably any other team in the league. But right now I have to go in favor of the Atlanta Reign. And I'm going to say a 3-1. I hope it's a close 5-map series. If Boston wins this game, I would be ecstatic, honestly. No hate to the Reign, but I want Boston to get that premier win. Houston was a good win. They got that win over Houston, but they lost to Florida last week. I need to see them be able to compete regularly with some of those top teams. It can't be a one-off fluke like it was against Houston. They need to be able to beat Florida, Houston, Atlanta regularly if they want any chance of winning. So I would like to see them show us that. But right now, I just don't really see it happening. Next match, one we've all been waiting for, the Vegas Eternal versus the LA Valiant. Oh boy, the toilet bowl that was promised. It's here. The two bottom teams in the Western region facing off. And it's an interesting one. The way the Eternal have changed their roster, they have a lot of very good players now. Obviously, with the addition of Finale, that opens up this roster to be even better, potentially. Plus, I think Knife has been really, really good. Knife has been a phenomenal player. Knife has looked really good for this team. I think that they've also improved with Tuyu and Irony on this team. So there are a lot of things to look at with this team and think that this team looks better. This team is in a much more kind of promising position. I don't love this team on ping. I think that is going to be a challenge for this team. And I think they're still going to be playing behind the 8-ball in the way that the Valiant are not. The Valiant have had all season to get better and improve. They've had that time to build their dynamic. They're not playing on that high ping. The thing that these two teams have in common is that they're both separated, right? They're all split up. They're not all playing together in the same place. So there's no advantage in that regard. But I do think the fact that the Valiant have played together for longer. They've looked pretty good. They've had decent... I mean, they pushed the Shock to 5 maps last week. They pushed Florida to 5 maps in the first half of the season. They beat the Gladiators. They looked, honestly, like, respectable. London beat them, but it was a good matchup there. They have been showing me a lot more than this Vegas roster has, even though I think this Vegas roster has improved a lot. I do think the Valiant right now are just in a better spot, and they're in a better position to walk away from this one victorious. So I'm going to take the Valiant by a score of 3-1. I think it'll be close. I think it'll be a decent match, but right now I think the Valiant just a little bit better, and so I'm going to give them the edge here in this one. Up next, we go to Sunday, APAC region, O2 Blast versus Panthera. Arguably the two weakest teams in the Eastern region facing off. Maybe the Charge are that low now. I don't know. It's getting hard to tell, but two teams kind of low in the standings in this Eastern region. I think right now you have to feel like this is a pretty close matchup because both of these teams are a bit rebuilt. They don't have the same kind of stars that they had in the first half of the season. Panthera lost Fate, of course. O2 Blast lost everybody that they had. So these are two teams kind of rebuilding. I think Panthera has the edge in terms of just being a little bit more, kind of put together from the first half of the season. They didn't lose all the same pieces. And I think that will help them out at the end. I think Panthera is going to take this one. I think this is a game, like, honestly, I'll be honest with you, I don't really care about this game. I don't think this game's going to be very good. I think it's going to be two middling teams that are, they're literal contenders teams where all of the best talent is not even on these teams anymore. The talent that got them to their spot now are gone. So I don't think it'll be a great match, but I think it'll be close. I think it'll be a 3-2. I'm going to go in favor of Panthera for this one because I think they're just a little bit better. But honestly, I'm really not that excited about this game. And I think I'm more excited for some of the other games in the APAC region. So I don't normally talk about how I feel about games in particular that are not great. But yeah, this one's not really inspiring much in me. Up next, we have Seoul Dynasty taking on Poker Face. Dynasty, obviously, like I said, struggling last week a bit. Poker Face coming off an okay week for them. It'll be interesting to watch this one. I think the Dynasty, now that it's week 2 with Vindane back in the roster, I think they should start to get better as time goes on. I think that it's very possible when you look at what the Dynasty have done that bringing him back in is going to take just a little bit more time because the only person on this roster that he played with last year was Prophet. He didn't play with Belistria and Void. He didn't play with Krillin. He didn't play with EasyHan. So I think give it a couple weeks. I think this team will look a lot better, and they already looked much improved last week. And so it'll just be a little bit more time, but I think this week they should be better. I think they're going to take this one with a 3-1 score. I think they are the better team. I think they should be favored in this one. And so to me, give me a 3-1 for Dynasty over Poker Face. Up next, final APAC game of the weekend. Guangzhou Charge taking on the Shanghai Dragons. Like I said, I don't love what the Charge have done. I don't love the changes they made to their roster. I think Shanghai has improved a lot since the first half of the season. I think Fate has helped this team out quite a bit. I think they're a better looking roster. Fate and Gaga is quite a fun rivalry. You consider back to that 2021 season, Shanghai versus the Chengdu Hunters. I don't think the Charge are that good, though. I don't think they're that level of team. And then the Dragons should take this one by a score of 3-1. I love what they've done with Viper and Hisu. They've been phenomenal all year. I think Fate has brought a lot of kind of consistency in that tank role that helps them quite a bit. And I think they take this one because I just genuinely think they are the better team right now. Moving on to the final few matches of the week in the Western region, we have the Florida Mayhem versus the Washington Justice. I like Mayhem a lot. I think they're one of the best teams in the league right now. I think they're the second best team in the league right now. I think when you look at what they've done, I think you have to take a lot of, or at least second best team in the Western region. I think what the Mayhem have done is very impressive. Justice, to me, just don't have the same level of performance and play that the Mayhem have shown this season. So to me, yeah, give me the Mayhem in this one. And I'm going to say pretty one-sided game. Give me a 3-0 for the Mayhem over the Justice. I think they're the better team, and I think they take this one with relative ease. Up next, we have the London Spitfire taking on the Vegas Eternal. Once again, more fun with the Vegas Eternal. Another decently winnable game for them. Good weekend last weekend from London Spitfire, of course. Makes me feel pretty good, though, that London should be able to win. I think on ping, Vegas will have a bit of a difficult time trying to challenge what the Spitfire do with their rush compositions. I think it's hard to win against that on ping. Like, it's much harder to challenge that than there's a challenge to like a dive comp on ping. And so I feel like, unfortunately, Vegas is not going to be easily able to get a win over the London Spitfire, who have solidified a lot. They look a lot better. They had a very good weekend last weekend. I do not want to act like this is purely Vegas being a bad team. Vegas is much better now than they were in the first half of the season. It's not even a question. Making the moves they made, smart moves. Like, they were genuinely good moves. They added good players. But it was late in the season. It's going to be hard to kind of find that value. And I think London's style of play is enough to give them a pretty dominant 3-0 win. I would not be surprised if Vegas wins a map, or even if it goes to map 5, honestly. Neither of these teams, I think, are so far ahead or behind the other that it couldn't be close. But I think Spitfire have enough going for them that they should be able to take this one and have the advantage in it. Final match of the weekend is the LA Gladiators taking on Vancouver Titans. Two teams in interesting spots. I don't really like what either of these teams brought the last time we saw them, but it's better, to say the least. And so that's kind of where I sit here. Like I said before, I think the Gladiators will look a lot better this weekend than they did the first weekend. It'll be more time to work Marvel into the schedule or into the roster. Yes, I want to see Marvel in LA and be able to play with the team in person, because I think that will help them out a lot. And I think he would bring a lot of kind of additional play there, but that's a lot to ask, especially when you just consider how far he is. I hope the addition of Cal helps out, because I think they're a very good player who will be pretty good help for the team. Vancouver, to me, are a solid roster. They have a lot of talented players, but I want to see more of the Heesang sugar-free experiment working super well across multiple maps and multiple metas and multiple compositions. And I just don't really think that's going to happen. And so I think the Gladiators are going to take this one. But I'm going to say a score of 3-1, because I think Vancouver's still a good enough team. They'll take a map potentially, even potentially 2. But I think Gladiators walk away from this one ultimately victorious. So there you go. That's the picks for this week. Bit of a long one this week. Lots of games, lots of stuff to cover, lots of stories. But there's all my picks. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts, where you agree, disagree, whatever. As always, if you want to join my Pick'em leaderboard, you can find the code for that in the description if you want to join it. We can all do our Pick'ems together. But you saw my Pick'ems here today, so you know what I'm picking already. But if you enjoyed this video and want more like in the future, consider liking and subscribing. Your support does help out a bunch with the channel. That's going to be all from me for today. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.